Out of 170 videos that I've posted on this channel, this is the one and only video I've ever been nervous to make.
Addison Tower, Surgery 655 is actually going to depart to the east. I'm climbing up through the clouds and then just going to head outside of everything. And at about right now, you'll probably realize that I'm not going to listen to y'all's instructions, and I'm just heading to East Texas in a career track. So I'm gonna pull the COM1 circuit breaker and the COM2 circuit breaker right here soon. As soon as I empty the mic.
Picture this, you're cruising at 35,000 feet on a routine flight. The captain's voice sounds calm over the PA, reassuring everyone that all is well. But what if behind that composed tone lies turmoil? What if the person at the controls, responsible for hundreds of lives, is silently battling depression, exhaustion, or worse? It's a scenario few passengers imagine, yet in 2025, it's becoming an unsettling reality aviation insiders can no longer ignore. Are airline pilots mentally well enough to fly? This once unthinkable question is now on the lips of industry leaders and safety experts. In an era where aviation has achieved astonishing technical safety, a hidden crisis has taken shape in the cockpit. Pilot mental health has emerged as the new frontline of flight safety. And it's not just a niche issue, it's a widespread, pressing concern that's only recently started to see the light of day. In this video, we'll uncover the state of pilot mental health in 2025, blending hard facts and human stories. We'll look at alarming statistics on pilot burnout, depression, and stress, and hear the personal struggles behind those numbers. We'll explore why so many pilots suffer in silence, from grueling work hours to a culture of stigma and fear, and examine the efforts to break this silence. From experts sounding the alarm to new reforms and support programs, we'll see what's being done to ensure the well-being of those we trust with our lives in the sky. Stay with us as we navigate this critical topic, one that could change how you think about the friendly skies and one that could make flying safer for everyone. By the mid-2020s, data has shattered the myth that pilots are immune to mental health issues. A landmark Harvard study first revealed the scope. About 12.6% of airline pilots worldwide showed signs of depression, and 4.1% had even experienced suicidal thoughts in the 2 weeks prior. In other words, hundreds of pilots were flying with significant depressive symptoms, often without treatment. As many admitted, they avoided help for fear of jeopardizing their careers. For context, those depression rates are roughly on par with what the general public experiences. Pilots, despite rigorous medical screenings, are just as human as anyone when it comes to mental health. And new research suggests the problem may be even more widespread today. In 2024, a large survey of 4,494 European commercial pilots found 18% screened positive for possible depression and 23% for an anxiety disorder. Nearly 1 in 5 pilots with symptoms of depression is a startling figure. Nearly 1 in 4 struggling with anxiety is even more sobering. These European pilots were surveyed after new support programs were put in place, yet a significant portion still reported symptoms, indicating that the need for mental health care remains substantial even in a post-Germanwings reform, which we'll talk about later. Stress and burnout are pervasive as well. Over half of pilots in one pre-pandemic survey said they had experienced feelings of depression or anxiety at some point in their career. And while burnout isn't a formal medical diagnosis, it's a reality for many in the airplane. In fact, studies estimate around 40% of pilots have experienced burnout, a rate comparable to that of an overworked physician. Pilot unions regularly warn of rising fatigue levels. Long duty days, overnight flights across time zones, and high-pressure schedules have left pilots exhausted to the point that fatigue has become one of the top safety issues reported confidentially by crews. During the COVID-19 pandemic, things only got harder. Many pilots faced job insecurities and long grounding periods, driving increased anxiety and chronic stress in the profession. Perhaps most chilling are the implications for safety. While extremely rare, there have been cases of pilot suicide that ended in tragedy. The most infamous one was Germanwings Flight 9525 in 2015, when First Officer Andreas Lubitz who had hidden a history of depression, locked the captain out of the cockpit and deliberately crashed the plane, killing all 150 people on board. Investigators discovered Lubitz had torn up sticky notes and records of suicidal ideation that he concealed out of fear for losing his medical. Germanwings was a wake-up call, but it was not entirely an outlier. Over the past few decades, a handful of other crashes and incidents, from the suspected suicides behind Egypt Air 990 in 1999 and LAM Mozambique 470 in 2013, to the mysterious crash of China Eastern 5735 in 2022, which is widely believed to have been intentional. These have suggested that unaddressed mental health issues, however rare, can slip through and lead to horrific outcomes. Moreover, outside of such high-profile disasters, multiple pilot suicides have occurred off the job, personal tragedies that usually stay private unless they're tied to an accident. To be clear, the vast majority of pilots do not pose a danger to others, even if they're struggling internally. But these statistics and cases highlight a grim paradox. Pilots are trusted with our lives, yet many don't feel safe trusting others with their pain. It's a crisis of silence that the industry is now urgently trying to confront. Numbers tell one side of the story. The human side comes alive through personal accounts. Many pilots have begun to share their experiences, some anonymously, some publicly, revealing what it's like to grapple with mental health issues while wearing the captain's stripes. These stories are often heartbreaking and eye-opening. Take the story of a young flight student. We'll call him Alex. Alex's dream was to be an airline pilot, and he was well on his way until he began suffering from depression during training. He desperately wanted help, but was terrified that coming forward would destroy his flying career. In the end, Alex tragically took his own life, and after his death, his grieving parents found a letter in which Alex implored them to get the FAA to change their rule on pilots seeking help with mental health. It would help a lot of people. In talking to others, Alex's parents heard conflicting narratives. Officials insisted he could have gotten treatment without losing his medical, but many pilots told them a different truth, that Alex's fear was justified, and seeking help would likely have ruined his chances of ever becoming a professional pilot. This young man's story illustrates the ultimate cost of a system that, despite aiming to protect safety, may drive vulnerable pilots into despair and silence. Now consider a veteran aviator with decades in the airplane, someone like Captain Joseph Emerson, who was a 44-year-old pilot for Alaska Airlines. In October 2023, Emerson was off-duty hitching a ride in the jump seat of a routine flight when something went horribly wrong. Cruising high above the Pacific Northwest, he suddenly told the on-duty pilots, "I'm not okay." And before anyone could react, he reached up and tried to shut down the plane's engines mid-flight. A frantic struggle ensued. Thankfully, the flight crew wrestled him away from the controls and diverted the plane safely. The incident shocked the nation. How could a seemingly seasoned airline pilot attempt something so unthinkable? The answer emerged in the investigation. Emerson later confessed that he had been suffering from severe depression, felt like he was having a nervous breakdown, hadn't slept in 40 hours, and had recently experimented with psychedelic mushrooms in a desperate attempt to self-medicate. Crucially, he never told his employer or the FAA about his mental health struggles. Emerson admitted he avoided seeking help until it was too late. According to his wife, he refused to see a professional or take medication because he feared any disclosure would ground him, and their family simply couldn't afford the loss of income that a medical grounding would entail. In this case, unlike Germanwings, disaster was averted, but the industry was left with a very near miss and a very clear warning. As one pilot and writer noted, Emerson's case is a sad case of crumbling mental health. It was another foreshock of an earthquake decades in the making. Even those who manage to get help often do in secret. Bruce Landsberg, a highly respected pilot and former vice chairman of the NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board, shared a powerful personal anecdote at a 2023's aviation panel. Landsberg's own son, an Army vet, had died by suicide due to PTSD, giving Bruce intimate understanding of mental health struggles. Bruce himself had years of flying under his belt, and he admitted that at one point he felt the need to step away and get counseling. He voluntarily grounded himself to seek therapy. Did I report this to the FAA? No, I did not, he confessed bluntly. Here was a senior safety official acknowledging that even he, knowing the rules inside and out, did not trust the system with his mental health disclosure. The risk to his career seemed too great. His story underscores how deep the culture of silence runs, even among the most experienced aviators. And then there are countless anonymous tales shared peer-to-peer, pilots who cry in hotel rooms on faraway layovers but wear a smile at briefing the next morning, others who self-medicate with alcohol or sleeping pills just to cope cope with stress and jet lag. Those who have lost colleagues to suicide and quietly wonder if it could have been prevented. On online forums and in confidential conversations, pilots describe colleagues showing up exhausted or emotionally drained. One chilling statistic often cited based on historical data, experts have estimated that on average one pilot every few years takes their own life in a way that could endanger others. It's an estimate no one wants to see borne out. Each story, whether it ends in recovery or tragedy, paints the same picture. Pilots are wrestling with mental health challenges, usually alone and in the shadows. These personal stories are finally sparking a broader conversation. To understand why pilots feel they must hide their struggles, we need to examine the unique pressures of the job and the barriers that have long stood in the way of getting help. Why pilots suffer in silence, causes and pressures. What makes flying airplanes a crucible for mental health? The job itself, for starters, is unlike any other. Pilots operate in a high-stakes environment where stress is part of the description. Split-second decisions, ever-changing weather, complex machinery, and hundreds of passengers depending on you to get them safely home. The type of person who is willing to be at 35,000 feet and has complete responsibility for 250 people may not be the same type of person who will easily raise their hand and say, "I think I might need to step away to get some help," explains Dr. William Hoffman, a neurologist who works with airline pilots. In other words, the very traits that make a good pilot, self-sufficiency, coolness under pressure, a steel-nerved confidence in handling any emergency, can also make it harder for that pilot to admit vulnerability. Pilots are trained to solve problems, not admit to them. Then there's the lifestyle. The pilot profession is really a lonely profession, says Captain Dennis Taher, an American Airlines pilot and union spokesperson. It's a rewarding profession, but you're out on the road a lot. It puts stress on family and personal things. We don't talk much about it, but we know internally that stress. Long stretches away from home, missing birthdays and holidays, sleeping in hotels more often than one's own bed. It's a recipe for isolation. Relationships can suffer. Support networks are tough to maintain. Pilots often feel they have to just suck it up because complaining would be seen as weakness. Chronic fatigue is another culprit. Unusual hours, red-eye flights, jet lag crossing time zones, early pre-dawn departures play havoc with pilot sleep cycles. Studies have identified factors like circadian disruption, high workload, and unpredictable schedules as major drivers of fatigue in aviation. As one union fatigue survey revealed, 3 out of 4 European pilots admitted to microsleeping or dozing off at least once while flying in the past month. A startling statistic that speaks to how overworked many pilots are. This kind of exhaustion isn't just physical, it erodes mental resilience, paving the way for burnout and emotional distress. Overwork, lack of sleep, and stress together form a potent triple hit to a pilot's mental state. But beyond the job's inherent pressures, the biggest reason pilots suffer in silence is the pervasive stigma and fear surrounding mental health in aviation. The culture of the cockpit has traditionally valued toughness, confidence, and stoicism. Any hint of psychological weakness has long been viewed as taboo. Mental health is a taboo topic among pilots. Simply raising it could mark a pilot as having a problem, found a 2023 qualitative study of U.S. airline pilots. One pilot in that study bluntly described the unwritten rule: you can't go see a therapist, you can't go see a counselor, you are constantly worried about losing the certificate in your pocket and the ability to feed your family. You're going to lose your identity. That stark statement lays bare the terror that many pilots feel. Their pilot's license isn't just a piece of paper or plastic card, it represents their livelihood, their passion, even their very identity. The mere possibility of losing it due to mental health admission is to many unthinkable. This fear isn't entirely imagined out of thin air. It's rooted in how aviation regulations have traditionally handled mental health. Pilots must pass stringent medical exams at least yearly, often every 6 months for airline pilots, and must disclose any medical or psychological condition on their FAA medical application. Certain diagnoses like psychosis or bipolar disorder are automatic disqualifiers. And while common issues like mild depression or anxiety aren't an automatic kiss of death, checking yes on that mental health box can trigger what many describe as a bureaucratic nightmare. Pilots know that admitting to seeing a therapist or taking an antidepressant will likely shunt your application into an opaque, Byzantine process of additional evaluations and indefinite waiting. Months, even years can pass while the FAA's Aerospace Medical Division reviews your case, often with little communication. In the end, you might be cleared to fly again, or you might be denied. perhaps with little explanation as to why. During that time, you're grounded and unpaid. For a pilot living paycheck to paycheck or supporting a family, even a few months off work can be financially devastating. It's no wonder one analyst noted many pilots would rather ignore or hide their mental health problems than disclose their condition and risk their very livelihood. The result is a culture of concealment. In one study, nearly 27% of pilots admitted they had withheld information about their mental health when seeing an aviation doctor, and 56% said they had avoided getting necessary medical or psychological care altogether, specifically out of fear of losing their flying status. Think about that for a second. More than half of pilots surveyed chose not to get the care they needed because the cure felt riskier than the disease. Additionally, 81% of pilots in another survey said they wouldn't even use company-provided mental health resources or hotlines out of fear that it wouldn't stay confidential. They worry that if they confess stress or depression to a company counselor, it'll get back to management or the FAA, and the next day someone will pull their medical certificate. Some pilots even report that during their mandatory medical exams, they feel pressured to lie. They describe how certain aviation medical examiners implicitly signal them to just give the right answers. No, doc, I'm fine. No issues here. So that nothing has to be officially reported. It's a dance of don't ask, don't tell that many participate in out of self-preservation. To be fair, regulators point out that the fear is often exaggerated. According to the FAA, most mental health conditions, if treated, do not disqualify a pilot from flying. In fact, only about 0.1% of medical certificate applicants who disclose a health issue are ultimately denied their license. But in the court of pilot opinion, perception is reality. There's a common saying among aviators: if you want to keep flying, never admit anything on that medical. The widespread belief is that you are essentially punished for being honest, even if official stats say otherwise. And unfortunately, there is some truth behind that fear. While permanent denials are indeed rare, temporary disqualifications are very common. About 20% of pilots who disclose mental health issues get an initial denial or deferral from frontline examiners, meaning that they are grounded at least until further review. The review process to get to yes can be very time-consuming and costly, involving extensive psychiatric evaluations, documentation, and often months or years of waiting. Even if in the end the FAA says, okay, you're good to go, the pilot may have been out of work for a very long time and spent thousands of dollars in medical bills. As the FAA's own aviation rulemaking committee noted in 2023, getting to yes often carries a significant financial penalty for the pilot. For many, that's effectively a punishment for doing the right thing. In economic terms, the opportunity cost of honesty is just too high. Nowhere is the stigma-fueled silence more apparent than in cases of substance abuse problems. Aviation has a zero tolerance for drug or alcohol misuse on duty, rightly so. But that means pilots with addictions are extremely unlikely to come forward for help. Admitting you have an alcohol or drug problem is basically admitting you've been flying impaired, which is a fireable and bannable offense. So pilots keep it hidden until something forces their hand. Historically, many pilots with alcoholism only got identified after an incident, say a DUI arrest or failing a random drug test. The industry does have a rehabilitation program, the Human Intervention Motivation Study, or HIMSS, which since the 1970s has quietly helped over 4,500 pilots get treatment for substance dependence and return to the cockpit. HIMSS boasts an impressive 85 to 90% long-term sobriety success rate among those pilots who go through it. Yet, even with that success, HIMSS only reaches a small fraction of those who might need it. A FAA-sponsored review estimated that 8 to 12% of pilots will meet criteria for a substance use disorder in their lifetime, but only about 1.4% of US pilots are in HIMSS at any given time. The rest keep their problems underground, hoping to cope alone until either they conquer it or it catches up with them. The reason, again, is fear. Being grounded for rehab means outing yourself and risking your career. So pilots delay asking for help until perhaps after a near-fatal rock bottom. This echoes the broader mental health paradox. The system's heavy-handed approach may actually be catching the wrong pilot, punishing the ones honest enough to report a problem, while those who stay silent carry on flying with untreated issues. In short, a vicious cycle has persisted for years. Pilots don't speak up early, so problems fester. When a pilot finally does break down or makes a mistake because of unaddressed issues, it reinforces the industry's worst fear. See, mental illness is dangerous. which in turn leads to more strict rules and stigma, which then further discourages anyone from speaking up until it's too late. As long as pilots believe that any admission of a mental health struggle means losing your wings, they will go to great lengths to hide it. Breaking this cycle of silence is now seen as essential, not only for pilots' well-being, but for the safety of everyone who flies with them. Faced with these revelations, a growing chorus of experts from aviation psychologists to safety investigators to pilots themselves are calling for a new approach. Mental health, they argue, must be treated not as a taboo or a career-ending black mark, but as an integral part of aviation safety that can be managed and supported. As the Royal Aeronautics Society, RAES, declared in 2023, pilot mental health is the new front of flight safety, deserving the same proactive attention as any mechanical issue or training problem. The RAES, a leading global aviation body, called for a coherent global strategy to tackle this challenge, including more research into how common mental health issues are among pilots and better psychosocial risk management in the airlines. The core theme, according to the RAS chief executive David Edwards, is moving from a culture of silence to a culture of support. He noted that while the industry is starting to assist pilots in crisis more than before, it still lacks mechanisms to prevent issues or catch them early. In other words, waiting until a pilot is in full breakdown mode is far too late. The focus should be on early intervention and prevention. It's just like how we strive to catch small maintenance issues on aircraft before they become big problems. Regulators themselves are acknowledging the need for culture change. Billy Nolan, a former FAA acting administrator, has been vocal that the old way of handling pilot mental health isn't working. In late 2023, an FAA Aviation Rulemaking Committee, comprising experts from airlines, unions, medical fields, and government, delivered a set of recommendations aimed at overhauling the system. The committee explicitly urged efforts to improve awareness and recognition of mental health issues, reduce stigmas, and promote available resources to encourage voluntary self-disclosure in a confidential and protected environment. In plain language, they're saying pilots should be able to say, "I need help," without fear. The ARC recommended expanding mental health education through the industry and embedding a just culture approach, the same physiology used in safety reporting, where individuals aren't punished for admitting errors or issues as long as they're trying to do the right thing. The goal is to create an atmosphere where seeking help is seen as responsible, not reprehensible. Internationally, experts like Kate Manderson, the Chief Medical Officer of Australia's Civil Aviation Safety Authority, have been pushing for a preventative, non-punitive approach to pilot mental health. She and others have often drawn an analogy. Just as airplanes undergo regular maintenance to fix problems early, we want our aviation people to recognize a problem and seek support before it becomes serious. Mental health, in this vision, should be treated much like physical health or aircraft maintenance, something to monitor continuously and address proactively. Dr. Manderson has advocated for a global alignment on mental health standards through the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO or ICAO, so that pilots around the world aren't faced with wildly different rules and can be assured that getting help won't end their careers. She argues that a global approach would encourage preventative care and reduce the reflexive grounding of pilots at the first sign of trouble. Aviation psychiatrists and psychologists also emphasize the need to bust the myths that keep pilots from care. Many in the aviation community still hold outdated beliefs. For example, that any use of antidepressant medication is automatically disqualifying. It's not, well, at least not anymore. Or that seeing a therapist will instantly put you on the FAA's radar. Not necessarily true. Federal Air Surgeon Dr. Susan Northrup has publicly stated that the FAA is trying to dispel the myths through education, stressing that a mental health diagnosis is not a career ender. InvestigateTV.com, that quote is a mantra we hear now from top levels of the FAA and other agencies, and many experts say it needs to be echoed at every level of aviation. As one aviation psychologist put it, the aim is to normalize seeking help, make it as routine as getting an annual physical or simulator check. Pilots should see mental health maintenance as just another part of being a safe professional aviator. There's also a call to learn from what has worked. Substance abuse programs like HIMSS are proof that you can address a sensitive issue in a pilot population without sacrificing safety. In HIMSS, pilots who come forward with, say, an alcohol problem are taken off duty, treated and monitored closely, and then if they meet strict criteria and sustain recovery, allowed to return to flying under ongoing supervision. The result has been win-win. Pilots get help and often recover, and airlines retain experienced pilots rather than losing them forever. Why not apply a similar model to mental health issues like depression or anxiety? Many experts are suggesting exactly that. They envision a formalized pathway where a pilot could say, "Hey, I'm not okay. I need help." Take a temporary leave to undergo treatment, and then return to the cockpit once a doctor certifies they're stable and safe. This would treat mental health conditions much like any medical issue. As Dr. Manderson notes, you treat it, manage the risks, and avoid a career ending unnecessarily when someone can be helped. It's a radical shift from the old mentality of one strike and you're out. Pilots' unions and associations are also stepping up. The Airline Pilots Association, ALPA, represents tens of thousands of pilots, has been campaigning for a balanced approach to mental health, one that protects aviation safety and ensures pilots aren't punished for seeking treatment. Allied Pilots Association, or APA, represents American Airlines, has thrown its weight behind new legislation. More on that in a moment, aimed at reducing stigma and reforming the medical process. Even the National Air Traffic Controllers Association is on board, recognizing that controllers face similar issues and deserve the same supportive approach. At industry conferences and in airline boardrooms, these pilot advocates are sharing stories and data to convince any remaining skeptics that something has to change. When someone like Bruce Landsberg, a seasoned safety expert, openly admits he hid his own counseling from the FAA, or when a union rep like Dennis Taher talks about the silent stress every pilot carries, it hits home that every pilot, even the best of the best, could face a mental health challenge at some point. Acknowledging that isn't a threat to safety, ignoring it is. The message from experts is clear. We must break the silence before it breaks us. In the next session, we'll see how the industry is responding, the concrete steps being taken, from new programs in airlines to new laws in Congress, to turn these expert recommendations into reality. Breaking the silence, reforms and support on the horizon. Slowly but surely, the tide is turning. In the aftermath of high-profile incidents and under pressure from both experts and pilots themselves, the aviation industry has begun implementing reforms to support mental health. Reforms that balance safety with compassion. Here are some of the most significant developments by 2025. Peer support takes off worldwide. One of the most promising tools is the rise of peer support programs, PPSP. The concept is simple yet powerful. Pilots who are trained as peer volunteers are available to listen to and assist fellow pilots in distress confidentially. After the Germanwings tragedy, Europe led the way. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency rolled out new rules in 2020 and 2021, mandating that all EU airlines establish mental health support systems for pilots, which in practice meant confidential peer assistance programs across the board. By February of 2021, every airline in EU member states was required to have a peer support program where a pilot could reach out and talk about stress, burnout, depression, or substance use without immediate regulatory repercussions. The conversations remain private unless there's an imminent safety risk, giving pilots a safe chance to seek help early. The intent, as EASA stated, was to help reduce stigma and catch problems before they escalated. It's a preventative safety net. The results in Europe have been encouraging. Many airlines report that pilots are using the peer support networks, and some potential crises have been averted through early intervention. A 2024 study of European pilots found that those who felt their company had a strong just culture, non-punitive safety culture, and job security were far more likely to approach peer support if needed. That shows environment matters. If pilots trust the system, they'll use it. However, the same study noted a tricky catch. Pilots who were already experiencing depression or anxiety were less inclined to use peer support, perhaps still fearful of feeling ashamed. It suggests that peer programs, while crucial, must be accomplished by broader cultural shifts to truly reach everyone. Nonetheless, Europe's experience has validated peer support as a critical piece of the puzzle, so much so that the European Cockpit Association, a federation of pilot unions, is pushing to extend these programs beyond airlines into areas like air traffic control and smaller commercial operators. The idea is that no matter where a pilot works, they should have access to a peer who understands their world and can guide them to professional help if needed, without immediately endangering their career. In the United States, peer support has grown largely through voluntary efforts. Major airlines like American, Delta, United, Southwest, and others, often in partnership with ALPA or independent unions, have set up their own confidential pilot support lines in recent years. The FAA takes a cue from EASA has encouraged the expansion of pilot peer support programs organized by airlines and unions. By 2024, many U.S. airline pilots for the first time had a number they could call to talk anonymously with a fellow pilot about personal struggles. For example, American Airlines program run by APA and Delta's Pilot Assistance Network run by ALPA have both reported an uptick in pilots reaching out for help with issues ranging from fatigue to marital problems to depression. The FAA even started providing mental health training to peer volunteers, recognizing that these frontline helpers can play a role in prevention. Pilots who have used peer support often say it's a relief to talk to someone who gets it, who won't immediately label them unfit, but will help them figure out a plan, possibly involving seeing a therapist or a doctor. Importantly, peer support is about getting problems addressed before they become full-blown crises. As Captain Darren Fielding, who leads a peer program, put it, peer support acts as a bridge. It helps pilots seek help in a non-punitive way and get back to full productivity as soon as it is safe to do so. Fielding emphasizes it's just one piece of the solution, but an indispensable one. Number 2, changing the rules, regulatory reforms. Regulators are rewriting the rulebook to make it easier for pilots to get help. The FAA's 2023 Aviation Rulemaking Committee recommendation did not fall on deaf ears. By late 24 and into 25, the FAA started implementing changes to address long-standing complaints. One major move was updating policy on medications. Historically, if a pilot took antidepressants, that was grounds for grounding, unless they went through a very special issuance process. Only 4 SSRIs were allowed under strict conditions, but in 2023, the FAA added 3 more modern antidepressants, Cymbalta, Effexor, and Pristiq, to the approved list, signaling a more flexible approach in line with current medical science. This means pilots who need these medications for depression or anxiety can now be treated and still fly, provided they are stable on the meds. This is a huge shift from years past when any antidepressant use was seen as an immediate red flag. The FAA also decreased the frequency of cognitive testing required for pilots on SSRIs after research showed it wasn't always necessary. These steps reduce some of the burden and stigma of seeking pharmaceutical treatment. Another critical focus is streamlining the medical certification process. The FAA has openly acknowledged that backlogs and opaque procedures have hurt trust. In response, they've hired more mental health professionals to work in the aerospace medicine division, aiming to speed up case reviews and bring more expertise to evaluations. The goal is to decrease the wait times for pilots trying to get back to work. In FAA statements, they've set internal targets to resolve special issuance cases faster, and they now communicate a bit more clearly about what documentation a pilot needs to provide. The 2023 ARC recommended setting timelines for these processes. For instance, aiming to decide cases within a few months instead of leaving pilots in limbo indefinitely. By 2025, progress is visible. Some pilots report getting their medical back in, say, 3 months instead of 12 after starting treatment. This is a significant improvement. It's still not perfect, but it's moving. Crucially, the U.S. Congress has taken notice and is pushing the FAA to go further. In June of 2025, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee unanimously passed the Mental Health in Aviation Act of 2025, a bipartisan bill aimed at overhauling how pilots' mental health is handled. Key provisions of this pending legislation include requiring the FAA to revise its regulations to actively encourage voluntary disclosure and treatment, essentially codifying no punishment for seeking help principles, mandating an annual review of the medical certification special issuance process to continually expand treatment options and approved medication for mental health, and providing funding to recruit and train more aviation medical examiners, including adding more psychiatrists and psychologists to the pool. The bill also calls for implementing the recommendations of the 2023-2024 FAA Mental Health Rulemaking Committee in full. In short, Congress is saying make the system work for pilots and safety. The fact that this bill exists and has strong support is a testament to how far the conversation has come. Just a decade ago, pilot mental health was barely discussed on Capitol Hill. Now lawmakers are explicitly trying to break the stigma and fix the process. Advocacy groups like the Pilot Mental Health Campaign have been instrumental here. PMHC, founded by concerned pilots and allies, helped this legislation get introduced, emphasizing this system is broken and must be reformed. They highlight that a government-imposed culture of fear has existed and it's time to end. The PMHC and pilot unions are urging Congress to see this through. As of this script, the Mental Health in Aviation Act is awaiting a full House vote, but optimism is high. This is an important step towards a more supportive approach to pilot mental health, said AOPA's President Mark Baker, voicing support for the bill. The unity of this issue across airlines, unions, and regulators is something we haven't seen before. Number 3, building a supportive culture and safety net. Beyond formal rules, a lot is being done at the human level to change hearts and minds in aviation. Education and outreach have ramped up significantly. The FAA has rolled out what you might call a myth-busting campaign. Federal Air Surgeon Dr. Northrup and others appear in videos at conferences at flight schools repeating the message, getting help will not automatically end your career. They cite that 99.9% of pilots who seek treatment eventually get back to flying, and they share success stories of pilots who took a break for therapy or meds and are now safely back in the cockpit. This kind of messaging, directly from regulators, is intended to chip away at the entrenched fear. Aviation medical examiners are also receiving enhanced training. The FAA updated its guide for AMEs to better educate them on mental health issues and how to evaluate pilots fairly. AMEs are being encouraged to treat pilots as partners in health to create an atmosphere in the exam room where a pilot might actually feel comfortable saying, I've been feeling pretty down lately, without immediately dreading a grounding. Some AMEs now proactively mention to pilots, if you ever struggle, please tell me, we can work through it. Building that trust is key. Airlines, too, are doing more. Many now include mental health topics in their recurrent training or safety newsletters. It's not unusual now for a carrier safety briefing to include a segment on fatigue management, stress reduction, techniques, or resources for counseling, things that would have been glossed over in the past. Unions have started wellness committees, hosting webinars on coping with stress, and inviting psychologists to talk at pilot meetings. All of these small cultural shifts add to a single message. It's okay to not be okay, and we'd rather help you than lose you. Some innovative programs have appeared as well. For example, a few airlines have created ground duty operations for pilots who need a mental health break, allowing a pilot to temporarily work in a training department or a technical office role while they recover. This means the pilots don't lose income or professional status. They stay connected to the company and can transition back to flying more smoothly. Improved insurance and leave policies are also on the table. Pilots have long complained that if they take medical leave for mental health, disability insurance might not cover it fully or long enough. Now unions are negotiating better coverage specifically for mental health treatment, recognizing it might require months off. The idea is to remove the financial disincentive to seek help. If a pilot knows they can get, say, 50 to 75% pay for a few months while in treatment and that their job will be waiting, they are far less likely to hide their condition until it worsens. International coordination is increasing as well. ICAO has begun work on global guidelines for pilot mental health support, driven in part by pressure from countries like Australia and organizations like RAES. This could mean more standardized practices across borders, so a pilot in India or Brazil or the US all get similar levels of support. Finally, let's highlight the power of pilots speaking out. Perhaps the most heartening change is that pilots themselves are breaking the taboo. Some, like the late Alex Hauser, are speaking through letters from beyond, inspiring campaigns in their name. The Hauser Project was launched in 2025 to research and prevent pilot suicide, named in honor of the lost young aviator. Others, like a pilot named Troy, who hosts a podcast about his own mental health journey, or Michelle, a counselor from a flying family working with AMEs, are sharing personal insights to humanize the issue. Even media outlets that once shielded away from this topic have leaned in. The Atlantic ran a piece titled "Why Pilots Don't Get Therapy" in 2025, and major networks have covered the new legislation and the Horizon Air incident as a catalyst for change. This public attention reduces stigma. When passengers, airline execs, and regulators all acknowledge that pilots are people too, it becomes easier for a pilot to say, "I need help," and not fear being misunderstood. As we wrap up this deep dive, one thing is clear. Pilot mental health is no longer aviation's dark secret. What was once only whispered about in closed rooms or after tragedies is now openly discussed in boardrooms, Capitol Hill hearings, and yes, even the cockpit. The journey to this point has been painful. It took loss of lives, near misses, and the courage of many individuals stepping forward to force this issue. But 2025 marks a turning point. The industry is starting to treat mental health not as a threat to as safety, but as a component of safety. A pilot who is supported in taking care of their mental well-being is a safer pilot. That's the new understanding. Mental health and aviation safety go hand in hand, not head to head. There is reason for hope and cautious optimism. The reforms underway, peer support networks, improved regulations, better education are laying the groundwork for a healthier pilot community. Laws like the Mental Health and Aviation Act, if fully enacted, promise to cement these cases and prevent backsliding, ensuring that what we're seeing now isn't just a brief moment of enlightenment, but a lasting transformation. As a result, the next generation of pilots could come up in a very different environment from the last one, where one admitting you need a break or a bit of help is viewed as a responsible stewardship of safety, not a personal failure. Imagine a future flight where if a pilot feels the weight of depression creeping in, they can talk to their chief pilot or an occupational health doctor and say, "I'm struggling a bit. I think I need some time to get better." And the response is, "Thank you for telling us. Take the time you need. We've got your back, and we'll see you again when you're ready." That is the kind of future these efforts aim to create. It serves everyone. The pilot gets care, colleagues aren't put in tough situations, and passengers ultimately fly with crews that are fit and focused. Of course, culture doesn't change overnight. There are still pilots out there suffering quietly, still afraid. There are still skeptics who grumble that if you can't handle it, you shouldn't be in the airplane at all. And there will always be the specter of those rare but devastating incidents that make headlines and could reignite fear. The work, therefore, is ongoing. Awareness needs to continue among pilots, airlines, regulators, and the public. The moment we stop talking about it is the moment the old ghosts of stigma can creep back in. As passengers, aviation enthusiasts, pilots, we all have a role. We can support airlines that prioritize crew well-being. We can push back against sensationalism that paints a depressed pilot as a potential mass murderer. That kind of narrative only increases stigma. Instead, we should understand that pilots are heroes and humans. They carry an immense burden so that you can travel the world safely. The least that you can do is ensure they don't have to carry the burden of mental illness alone in the dark. In closing, I want you to think back about the image of the pilot that we talked about at the start of this video. The one fighting invisible demons at 35,000 feet. In the past, that pilot might feel that he has nowhere to turn. But in the aviation world, we're striving toward that same pilot would have resources at hand. A fellow pilot to call at 2 a.m., a union rep ready to advocate for them, a company and regulator that will give them the treatment they need without ending their career. They would have hope. No pilot should have to choose between their dream and their health, and no passenger should have to worry that the smiling captain greeting them at the door might be silently crying out for help. By bringing this issue into the light, by fostering a culture of openness and support, we make the sky safer for everyone. For all the turbulence that life can throw at those in the cockpit, there is now a genuine effort to ensure they don't face it alone. That ultimately will make for smoother flying for everyone. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you found this exploration enlightening, consider sharing it. It's a conversation that affects every one of us who sets foot on an airplane. By spreading awareness, we honor those pilots who've bravely spoken up, and we help clear the path for others to follow. Let's keep the conversation going, and let's ensure aviators have blue skies both outside and within. I'll see you guys next week.